Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi, and I said earlier on my short it was Tuesday. Scratch that, it's Wednesday. Clearly need another big fat cup of coffee. My synapses are not fired up all the way yet. First, I want to give a big thank you to everybody who tuned in to that live last night. We had Biggie and Jamie on, who have been our note takers in the courtroom when people opt out, which is just amazing. We've really been able to cover every aspect due to Biggie and Jamie taking time, their gas money, to go and sit and get writer's cramp so that I can convey to you what happened in that courtroom every second. I'm so grateful for them. And you guys give them a big thank you if you see them online. And thank you to everybody who donated Super Chat last night. You guys are very generous and I'm very grateful. Music fact of the day: Pink Floyd's The Wall turns 43 years old today. It was number one on the US charts for 15 weeks straight. It is my second favorite album next to Dark Side of the Moon, which I play in its entirety maybe once a day, if not every other. Fun fact, when I was pregnant with my kids, you're supposed to put the little headphones on your belly with Mozart and stuff to make them really smart. Well, I did Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, and The Wall. And ironically enough, my 17-year-old and I now have bonded through Pink Floyd in one way. A million other ways. I'm a very blessed mom, but it's really cool to talk lyric theory with her about Pink Floyd. And we just got to see Roger Waters a few months ago in Atlanta. And since they're not together because they're all bickery about money, that was the next best thing. Great concert. If you can see him, go do it. Also, get the guitar solo on my favorite song of all time, Comfortably Numb, was voted 4th best ever by Guitar World readers. So the album The Wall is kind of an autobiography of Roger Waters' life. His dad died in World War II. It fractured the family. His mom became very overbearing. Or you can watch the movie. I will do it tonight, as I do every year on the anniversary of the release. Fun fact, the children who sang on Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 never got paid. Also, if you watch the video or the movie, they lip sync the wrong lyrics. Some of them do. It's fun to watch. Okay, funny story about a stray cat around here before we jump into this rebuttal. His name is Bobcat, right? We named him. He has no tail. He has a little stub, right? We've had some wind lately. I don't know what's up, dude. If I had an umbrella, like I could just fly away. And so I look out this morning and the cat looks like he's drunk. And I'm like, what is up? He's gotten into like some fermented fruit. And then I realized cats balance with their tails. And this poor cat, y'all, could not stand up straight. And finally, he gets up against something just for shelter. Poor little dude. He's a sweet cat. I feed him all the time. Okay, rebuttal. I said yesterday that I thought the defense did a really good job on closings with what they had. And I really do think defense attorney Parker poked some holes into the state's theory or put some reasonable doubt in the jury's mind. But Prosecutor Wilson did the rebuttal. And I think that was the best decision that the state could have made because he brought some new energy into that rebuttal and left those jurors with a really powerful performance that lasted a little over an hour. And what did he do? He went back and then repoked holes in the defense attorney's closings and then made you doubt what he said. So let's get into it. I mean, he came out like a drill sergeant. He starts off by saying, Mr. Parker said something in his closings that destroyed the credibility of the argument and his entire defense of the case. He said, you can't believe Jake. My client didn't do this. But if you believe anything Jake says, it would be that George did not go that night to shoot anyone or had the intent to do it. You can't have it both ways. There's a saying in football, if you have two quarterbacks, you have no quarterback. You don't have a credible offense. You're not doing anything you can to make anything work. Two defenses, it shows you have no credible defense. The reason they did that is because he's guilty. He points right over to George. I mean, just red face, forcefully. He is guilty. And then he proceeds to name all the victims in this case, all 8. There's been no direct testimony he pulled the trigger in any of the murders, but you better believe he's up to his eyeballs with his family. When he put on those dark clothes the night of the murders, the ski mask, and left that house, you know, the moment they left, the plan was for him to get in the back of the truck and for him to kill Chris Sr. How do we know that? He had the SKS. Jake had the 22. If you're going to kill someone at night from a distance who is a moving target, you aren't using a little 22 pistol. When you're going to snipe someone like that, you're using a rifle. What will put that target down with one shot? The SKS. If you don't put them down with one shot, the plan goes crazy. Things could go bad really quick. And who had the SKS? Jake tells us when they were laying on the ground, and up to this point, everything is going to plan. And for some reason, George didn't shoot. Was the silencer too big? Was there a problem with him moving? Was Billy too close? Or did he just chicken out? We don't know what happened. Jake said when that happens, he takes the SKS. Dad comes out. What the heck is going on? And Billy says, I'll get him to where you can shoot him. Under the guise of I can't find my phone, they get Chris to go to the door and call Billy's phone. The evidence tells you this. When Jake sees him, he shoots. Do you remember how Jake described how he shot? He knew he missed with the first shot, and then he closed his eyes and started squeezing. He doesn't know how many times he shot. We know there's 6 ballistic events, and we recovered those ballistics. And then he says, look at those holes. That's a pretty tight shot group. Whoever shot this hasn't thrown many shots for a guy whose vision is allegedly terrible, and says he squeezed the trigger, and that's the kind of shot group from someone who sees well at night. Who did this? Maybe someone who hunts at night with a rifle. But Jake told you, I love my brother. I don't want him to be convicted. Jake wants you to find George not guilty. That's what he wants. Jake tells you again, George didn't pull the trigger. We pushed him on that. When he was being interviewed, we asked him if he really wanted to throw George under the bus. That was the moment he could have done it, but he didn't. So I don't know if he was sort of insinuating there that George took that shot. That's just something we'll never know. George participated with the trick, going with the intent to shoot. He said, my brother didn't pull the trigger. You have to look at that because Jake said that we have no direct evidence that he pulled the trigger. Under law, George didn't have to pull the trigger once to be guilty of these murders. Complicity is when 2 or more people have a criminal goal. One does one part, the other does the other. Both are guilty under the law. Mere presence alone is not enough to find someone guilty of complicity. And then he says, if Mr. Junk calls me after work and says, hey, my car's broken down, can you take me to Walmart? And while we're there, he shoves things in his pants and I don't know about it. I drive home with him and he starts pulling things out of his pants and says, hey, look what I stole. I'm not guilty even if I drove the car. If he told me he was going to steal before we go and I drive him and I say, hey, Rob, someone's coming, now I'm guilty. It wasn't my mere presence. I aided, assisted, and abetted. You're on the hook. While it's not enough to be present at the scene of a murder, if you know someone is going to commit a murder, you can do some things. You can't do some things. Number one, he says he has some numbered points. He stops after 10 because they just keep going. He ended up, I think, had 20. You can't let someone use your credit card to buy things to commit the murder. I need to be like, hey, don't use my credit card. If any item that's going to be used in the murder is purchased with your credit card and it sets off your fraud detection, you can't authorize that purchase. We know it was bought for the murders. They're talking about, I believe, the signal jammer or the bugging device. I'm blank on that right now. Angela bought it. It's from China. That's a significant purchase on George's credit card. There was a call to George from Cabela's, from the fraud department. They left a message. He called back. That one thing is enough to show aiding and abetting. You can't agree a murder needs to be committed, and you cannot adopt that reasoning as justification for committing these murders. You can't take a single dollar out of a safe or a drawer and give it to someone knowing they're going to buy a vehicle to be used in the murders. You can't go along with someone who is purchasing the vehicle for the murder. You can't hold one board, put one screw in or one nail into a false bed of a truck you know is going to be used in a murder. You can't handle or move one hay bale knowing that truck will be used to commit a murder. You can't sign false custody documents. So if you get shot by the very people you're trying to murder or you get arrested, you can't do that in anticipation for murder. You can't put on a dark mask, dark clothing, and go to a murder scene. You can't let an SKS you own to be put in a truck to be used by a murderer. You can't slide into a truck and out, whether it's to protect. I'm sorry, I don't know what I wrote here. You can't slide into a truck and out. You're on the hook. You can't move into a crime scene to move a body from one room to another. You're on the hook. You can't accompany anyone on a reconnaissance mission knowing the reason ultimately is to kill the people inside. You can't stand there as muscle for someone else to come in and kill someone. You can't stand guard so your co-defendant can go down the hall and kill people inside. You can't drive an extra vehicle as an escape option if things go south. Defense attorney Parker said, "Why take Chris Sr.'s truck? We didn't know the GMC truck was part of the plan. Actually, it was pretty brilliant. The truck is parked at Chris's. You don't need it to go to Frankie's. Any house you pull into, any house, and someone is outside smoking a cigarette, you see Chris's truck pulling up, you don't take a defensive action. You say, oh, it's Chris." When they went into Dana's, they didn't need the second truck, just Chris's. If his truck is at Dana's and something goes south, they're close enough to boogie back down to Chris's house and leave in the GMC truck. When you look at going to Kenneth's, you have to have an escape vehicle if something goes south. If while they're in Kenneth's, something goes south, you need that other truck parked up the road. It's too far to walk back to Peterson Road. We see the two trucks leaving on that camera. You see them. You cannot shortly after the murder strip out of all your clothes and hand them over knowing they're going to be destroyed because they're evidence. You can't dig a hole knowing evidence is going to be hidden. You can't buy a replacement gun after the murders. When Agent Scheider texted the picture of the 1911 when they were showing the gun to family members, meaning when BCI was showing a photo of Jake's hand holding that gun, the family is going to call and say, hey, FYI, they showed us a picture of this. You can't say, oh, Jake, that's a Photoshop. That's just a picture of a fish you caught in Alaska in your hand, and they Photoshopped a 1911 on it. The conversation goes more like this. Jake, that sure looks like that 22 you bought when we were at the gun show. Come to think about it, I haven't seen that 22 in a while. Or Jake, show me the 22. That's how that conversation goes. While talking about someone who's innocent, to say on a wire or in a conversation at the border, if you have no idea your family is involved and you sit through a 4-hour interview where they show you bloody shoe prints and ballistics found at your house and also found at the scene of some of the murders, and then they show you pictures of your mom buying shoes, and they say, by the way, your mom just said she bought these shoes for you. When you get out to that car and mom and dad are sitting in that car, you're going to say, what the heck was that, mom? They showed me a picture of you buying shoes and you said they were for me. How in the world are shell casings found at the murder scenes found at our house? He says, you didn't hear that on those recordings. And then he says, Angie, talking about Prosecutor Canepa, caught him in a lie up here on the stand. What was his reason? He said, I was worried about Vine. He was acting funny. I thought BCI poisoned him. His reasoning is that Sophia said they gave us a red drink. But Sophia didn't come out for over an hour after George and Vine. He sat quietly for an hour after that interrogation. He gets out there and Billy is giving him hand and arm signals saying, we've been bugged. If you're innocent and you sat through that and your dad said the car is bugged, you say, so what? We didn't do anything. What's the big deal? They couldn't. They didn't have their story straight yet. Angela had been hit with something she wasn't ready for. Her photo buying the shoes. They had to separate themselves from Montana and from the car they think is now bugged and have a family meeting and say, oh, how are we going to explain this one? That's what happened. And it shows again, he's guilty. All of them. All of them participated in all phases of this homicide. And he said, this is number 20, by the way. He said, I can't pressure witnesses not to talk to law enforcement, knowing they may have information to implicate you in the murders. He said, these are the 20 things they did as co-conspirators. He said, you will think of other things. You don't have to do all of those things. If you do one of those things, you show you aided and abetting and accept the group's intent. You're guilty under complicity theory of murder. You're going to get these jury instructions. In each count of the 22 indictments, you'll see he is charged as a principal offender. Counts 1 through 8 is overwhelming. It's a number of charges. We are claiming he is aiding and abetting in. And then he reads 1 through 8 of the indictment. He said it can get confusing. He didn't pull the trigger, but if you go to the end of the instruction, one of the last things the judge will instruct you on is complicity. And that is part of every count of his indictment. I suggest someone, if not all of you, take the complicity out of this stack. Read complicity along with each count. Does it apply to this count? It's important because each count is written as George being the principal offender. If he aided and abetting, he's guilty of that count. Anything the principal offender did is also on George. That's our theory in this case. Then he puts up this picture. I'm going to throw it up on the screen. And if you're new, I will put a link in the description. He puts up this picture and says, when you first heard about these murders in the community before you knew you would be a juror, you may have said, no way, this is about custody. No way you kill 8 people over a child. These kids were going to be raised by the Wagners. You heard Tabby signed over custody of Vine. She wasn't in a good position to take care of him at that point and thought one day she could see her kid under her terms. When it became apparent she was not going to get to see her son, she tried to get him back. It didn't matter if she had a job, a place to live. It didn't matter. She was never going to have custody of Vine. They stole Vine and they wiped out an entire family to get Sophia. I think it's interesting that picture. Jake looks like he's 10. It's just, I thought it was very bizarre. Just how young he looked. And it's eerie to look at that picture. This is after the murders. They're all smiling with big smiles as if nothing happened and just no remorse. They justified the killings over protecting Sophie from being abused. They never called children's services, took her to see a doctor because it wasn't true. They made terrible allegations against this family, but the reason they didn't do it in public, well, it wasn't true. It's the same reason they did it against Tabby and Beth. It's their playbook as part of a common plan or scheme. You can use that to show intent or motive. The common plan or scheme they used to get sole custody of the kids is they fabricate claims of abuse to get women out of their lives. It worked with Tabby and Beth. It didn't work with Hannah Mae. She had support. She was strong. She had a family. It wasn't happening with Sophie, and they knew this. They were scared of the rodents. He says, remember Billy's first interview in September of 2016? He tells the investigators, if you're going to fight Chris, you better put him down because he's coming back at you. And if you fight one of the rodents, you fight them all. On the tape, you hear George scared during a pickup with Sophie. George said, get out of here. Don't go by Chris's house. What do? They use their old fallbacks of sex abuse to justify their need to commit murder. And now it's time for a word from our paid sponsor of the week, BetterHelp. You know, it would be nice if life came with a user manual, such as when you have your first baby or you're navigating tough losses in life. Unfortunately, as we know, life does not come with a user manual. So when it's not working for you, it's normal to feel stuck. Navigating any of life's challenges can make you feel unsure, whether it's a career change, a new relationship, or becoming a parent. Therapists are trained to help you figure out the cause of the challenging emotions and learn productive coping skills, which makes therapy the closest thing to a guided tour of the complex engine called you. Therapy can help you learn to cope with past trauma, can give you coping mechanisms to the problems in your life, and give you a neutral person to help navigate the problem, big or small, we all face in life. As the world's largest therapy service, BetterHelp has matched 3 million people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists, available 100% online. Plus, it's affordable. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to match with the therapist. If things aren't clicking, you can easily switch to a new therapist anytime. It couldn't be simpler. No waiting rooms, no traffic, no endless searching for the right therapist. Learn more and save 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/whattheworld. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/whattheworld. If you peel the layers and remove custody, it's about power and control. If you know anyone who has control issues, the playbook is the same every time. And you see it play out in this case in a very textbook way. They need to control someone and they use fear. You may lose them. You have a fear of only you can control them. The fear someone else may have a relationship with that person. You see that in this case. The person being controlled is often cut off from family, friends. They're indoctrinated, unable to establish their own identities or belief system. They're under surveillance or observation. And when someone starts to lose control, you see them resort to desperate measures. The Wagners needed to control how the kids would be raised. That's a group trait they all subscribe to. I'm telling you, man, Wilson just fired this out, didn't stop, didn't hesitate. There was no pause in between his sentences. And it was powerful. It really, I said last night on the live, if you think about, I thought the defense hit a home run and it's going over the fence and man, we're going to have a hung jury. Then you have Wilson kind of running for the fence and he extends his arm over that fence and grabs the ball at the last second. That's the way I think about this rebuttal yesterday. He may have saved their case in his presentation. So he talks about people that are being controlled. They're cut off from family. Or I'm sorry, I just said that. He said, she's the control freak. But listen to the 2018 recordings when it comes to the need to control Beth and protect the kids, right down to who can and can't use the front door. Who runs the show? He points to George, him. He sounds just like Angela. He wants everyone to know he makes the rules and even threatens Jake. If you're not going to protect Sophia, I'm going to take her. Did you hear him manipulate Vine? Vine, those are bad people. They want to kill your dad, your uncle. That's manipulation. No way he's not involved. No way. If Jake and Billy are going to kill the Rodens, no way George is sitting on the sidelines. Jake can't see at night. Billy has a broken back and he's strung out on drugs. George is the protector and the fighter. Do you think the guy you heard on the recording was sitting this one out? He was coming and he was bringing all hell with him. For 1.5 years after they slaughtered the Rodens, they had it. The kids were being raised 100% Wagner, and he wants to control the outcome of this case. Why behind the deals with Jake and Angela? George wants you to believe Jake is our star witness, and this case rises and falls on Jake. We laid out 6 weeks of testimony before we ever put Jake on the stand. We wanted to show you the depth and complexity of the investigation. We wanted to show you that initially BCI did not lock in on the Wagners. It wasn't until September 2016 that they popped up on our radar. Red flag number 1, Jeff Tackett and Charlie Gilly told BCI that Billy was telling them stories of why the Rodens got killed. He said he and Chris were involved in a drug deal with Skid Montgomery. Poor Skid, name getting thrown everywhere. And we cut him out. Well, if Chris and his family is murdered and Billy's family doesn't have a scratch on them, that's suspicious. The car interview with BCI agents, remember outside the Kroger, Billy gets in and Lord have mercy, speaks banjo for an hour. He lied about his phone activity. He said, I don't have the phone I had the night of the murders. I broke it because Chris and I are best friends. After the murders, I kept wanting to call him and I got mad because he's dead and I broke my phone. Guess what? No calls from Billy to Chris after the homicides. Chris's calls go unanswered. And the next morning, Billy checks his voicemail and there's no calls back to Chris. He wouldn't know about the murders for hours. Why not call him back? Because you know he's dead. Billy gave the investigators a look at why all 8 were killed. He said, if you fight one rodent, you fight them all. BCI said, wait, you kill one, you may need to kill them all. He tells investigators the Skid Montgomery story, but leaves himself out because BCI is looking for a way to rule people out. But when Billy left, they said the opposite. We need to look into this and rule him out. They looked at Facebook records, and the way the Wagner said custody was rosy, it wasn't the case. In 2016, that's the first night Billy stays at Peterson Road. When is that? It's the night of the murders. George said he woke up and everything was normal. No, it wasn't normal. Your dad spent the night. Eventually, they found the shell casings at Peterson Road and matched the shell casings to the scene of some of the murders. And that's when the Wagners were in the crosshairs. BCI had the Wagners long before Jake comes forward. 99% of the evidence in this case comes from the hard work of BCI agents, analysts, and specialists, not Jake Wagner. Jake is a terrible, evil human. He will spend his miserable existence locked in a cage and separated from what means most to him, which is his family. As distasteful as it was, the state entered into the agreement with Jake for one reason: the guns. We needed the guns to rule out a drug connection. The Wagner's defense was the murders were because of Chris's drug trading. That's why they took Billy out of the equation. Wouldn't have been why Billy wasn't killed. Or the question would have been, why wasn't Billy killed? They went over town telling everybody. Billy was Chris's best friend. Frankie was George's best friend. We went to all the July 4th parties, but when Jake led us to the guns, it flipped the drug defense and the rumors heard in this community. No more arguing it was the cartel. Little Chris got in a fight 2 weeks before when someone threatened the whole family. Gone. That rumor is gone. No more arguing with the dirty sheriff who's now in prison. That would have been used to plant reasonable doubts in all your minds. The defense changes to now, I'm the black sheep. I hated my brother. Guess what? Don't match what you heard. Jake said on the stand he originally told his defense attorneys about George's involvement a year before he looked at a deal with us. That deal wasn't just for Jake. It was for George. He got death off, not just for himself, but for George too. In the recordings, you get a sneak peek of how the family interacted with each other, and Angela verified George's involvement. You heard her statement, which was in August of 2021, 4 months after Jake. It was important to verify some things he said in respect to the other family members' involvement, and we didn't give Jake's statement to anyone. We held it so nobody would know what he said. Angela is terrible and evil, and what she did instigating all this led to the homicides. And even though she didn't go to Union Hill, she's complicit. Angela didn't tell us George's version of the story, that he knew nothing. If you overlay her statement to Jake's 4 months earlier, they match. The only way it happens is if they're telling the truth. Their testimony was verified. What the investigation uncovered and removed all their potential defenses. The family operated with collective intent. The phone records verified Jake's statement, unlike what defense attorney Parker said. Dana was texting until just after midnight. Then there is a 3.5 hour gap before there's any other activity. 3:31 a.m. to 3:32 a.m. There are 7 texts to the same number within 30 seconds of each other. A 3-hour gap. And then 7 texts. So he says, have you ever had an experience where you have no service, and when you finally do get service, your phone pops off with all these alerts? As you look at these messages, it doesn't make sense why you have that gap. It's because Dana wasn't alive at 3 o'clock. She was killed sometime after midnight, after that last midnight activity. It's consistent with the security camera where we get the vehicle and Jake's testimony of what they did. Defense attorney Parker said Angela watched Billy and Jake walk out the door and then went to bed the night of the murders. That wasn't Angela's testimony. She said all 3 walked out the door, not just Billy and Jake. The shoes. Angela said she bought 2 pair, and Parker wants you to think she bought them for Jake and Billy. We surprised her at the border. She wasn't ready for that. They didn't like it, so she got rid of them. Talking about the shoes, what does she say? She bought them for Jake and George. And then he says, there's no way Billy's wearing Walmart athletic shoes. He had to interact with Chris and Gary. That's a really good point. What do you think Chris would have said if Billy rolled up in those Walmart shoes without Chris and Gary saying, what's going on? Parker said Jake was the only one in crime scene 1. When Chris was shot with the SKS, he was in the door and not on the porch. No blood on that porch. His arm was nearly severed off. No blood outside. Why is that important? The story of only one shooter doesn't work if Chris is inside the house. No evidence he tried to run or flee. Their expert nearly gave it up, but you could tell when he realized I may have messed up. Talking about the wood in Chris Sr.'s head, he said that came from the flooring outside. That's not wood. That's laminate. It's sawdust and glue, not wood. What is in Chris Sr.'s head? Wood, actual splinters. Inside the door frame, you see wood chipped off. You could see it click in their expert's eyes when I said it. Another important piece of evidence, the chest shot to Chris Sr., that was a contact shot. It charred his sweatshirt. That means someone in that house was waiting with that .40 caliber. When Chris spun around, Billy has the gun right at his chest and shoots him. The recliner was actually by the door and Gary was sitting in it and Jake sees him. When the shooting starts, at that point, Gary flips up and makes a move. How do we know? He has that .40 in the back of his cap where he popped that recliner up real quick. Billy shoots him in the back of the head and goes to Chris Sr. and shoots him as he lays by the recliner. You can see the straight line of the gunshots in the autopsy picture. He misses one and it's found under the trailer. The only way they're killed in that position is if it's fast. You don't have time for someone shooting under a car, then running inside, and Chris and Gary are in the same spots. Billy freaks out, runs outside. Jake gets the keys out of his pocket and goes to the grow room to pull the DVR. When he comes back, those bodies are moved. Any argument George was too big to move those bodies because of the hallway being so narrow is not true. The guy who did the Faro scanner, he's well over 6 foot and he got through and he didn't knock the trash off the chair. He didn't knock anything over. Who moved those bodies? It was George. Chris Newcomb said how strong he is. He said, you should see him drag a deer. That was kind of a visual, y'all. My mind went there. So that was a really good analogy I thought to put in there because somebody had to drag these bodies. We know they were drugged. They weren't carried. And I think it was a good mental visual to give that jury. Dead weight is heavy. Billy has a bad back. Jake goes to get phones, steps in blood. George already had at that point. While Jake is getting the phones, George doesn't know what's happening inside. Time distorts in situations like this. We do know while he was in there, either Billy or George went to the grow room. And how do we know it was one of those two? The door handle broke off to the grow room. Whoever went forced their way in. Jake had the keys. He didn't need to break the door handle. And Gary's blood smudged all over the door. Scene 3, he said Hannah Mae looked at him and he shot. Jake thought he shot her in the face at the hairline. Jake said, when I got to her, I noticed there was no blood in the hairline, and he was surprised because he thought he shot her in the face. When she made a gasp, she turned around, and he shot her in the back of the head. The defense said George's interview in Montana. Well, why didn't we play that? That's been the big question, y'all, right? Why didn't they just play this interview they relied heavily on? It's strategic. He never has to take the stand or be subject to cross-exam. He gets to sit back and listen to that interview. The only way he gets his story heard is to take the stand. I don't know if I believe that, y'all. I mean, maybe that was part of their strategy, but they were really shocked when they called George to the stand. They weren't anticipating it, and I think it was kind of clear with how cross-exam went. It was not till the next day, but still, you look at everybody's reaction. They weren't thinking he was going to take the stand. And I still firmly believe it's because that tape is probably full of, we don't think you're a suspect. They never denied that he was told that at the border either. When he was on the stand, George talked about the interview in Montana. He admitted he went to bed at 12:30. He admitted he lied about the kind of truck he had. He said, nobody's leaving that house without me knowing. The defense asked about the truck and how we rebuilt it and why we waited. Remember, they recreated that platform in the back and had some agents in the positions Jake said they were in. Well, they were going to argue he was too big to be in that truck. So we got people who were bigger than George, and we did that to dispute their defense. What did it show you? No problem at all. After we put that in, they backed off asking those questions. He had a good point on the goose box. It was put in the lake for their grandpa's birthday, which was in February. Jake and Angela said somebody got in the water. We know it wasn't February. You don't get in the water in February. Again, it validates Jake's statements because she didn't know he had said that. The box was put in the lake when it was warm. The defense talked about Jake's demeanor when he testified. Ms. Canepa talked about the lies George testified to. George's appearance and demeanor. The truth is the truth. There's no reason to practice or be coached about your answers if you're telling the truth. This is something I said the day he testified, y'all. The truth comes out freely. He was coached. When George was testifying, he literally was answering the questions before Parker was done asking them. He was putting the answers in the correct context before the defense had finished asking. You do that when you practice your answers. Why do that unless your answer isn't the truth? George gave specific answers to some questions which were in line with the points the defense was trying to make. His body language when he made denials about his participation was very different. Chris Newcomb said George wasn't much of a gambler. George has a terrible tale when he's bluffing, and it's a good thing he wasn't a gambler. It's very pronounced. So when the defense asked about softball type questions, George held firm eye contact the whole time. But when the defense asked about his knowledge or participation in the murders, he looked straight down every time. You don't get jury instructions on how to judge credibility. When you ask your kid if they did something wrong, they look all around and, they did something wrong. Same standard with George. Why is he lying? He's guilty. He knows what he's done. Wilson at that point said he just went through 10 pages of notes. He said, you've been here a long time. It's been a long case. I, like the defense, could go on a couple of more hours talking about how George is guilty and their defense is not credible. But there comes a time where I'm saying everything you already know. You're aware of the points. It's time to let you do your job. I want to leave you with the concept of doubt. One definition you will get is all possible doubt. We don't have to prove all possible doubt. We just have to prove reasonable doubt. If you're convinced he participated, he's guilty. All possible versus reasonable doubt, it's a puzzle. This was a great analogy, y'all. In August, we asked you to put a puzzle together, and for a couple of months, we've been handing you pieces of that puzzle. You're about to go back and put the pieces together. The defense may say where they think the pieces need to go, but at the end of the day, you put the puzzle together and you see a New York skyline. Not all pieces are there, but you see a gray statue. You see one hand has a book, an elbow might be missing, the other hand is up, but the whole torch isn't there. Maybe an eye is missing on the face, but when you look and see the pieces that are there, you see the Statue of Liberty. Y'all, boom. Even though all the pieces may not be there, to require us to give you every piece is to give you proof beyond all possible doubt. That's not our burden. We've given you the evidence you need to go back and find this defendant guilty. You should be firmly convinced George knew and participated in these murders. And when you look at the evidence and make that finding that he's guilty, you're required by law to find him guilty because that's what he is. That was it. I thought it was great, y'all. I really do think that was the push the state needed to potentially win this case and find George guilty. It was passionate. He clearly had reactions to some of the things he was using in his rebuttal. And I thought it was a great, great job by the state and by the defense. So this is where the nail biting comes in. I have not looked at my phone. It's been going off like crazy. It could be just ads for Christmas shopping or it could be tweets. So reminder, subscribe to the YouTube, hit the notification button, keep an eye on social media. If anything major happens, I'll be back on for an episode. But this is it for today. I'm going to start getting together some other things, a big update tomorrow in the University of Idaho murders. Haven't updated that case since the weekend and not much has come out, no suspect, but some things have happened that I want to get out there to you. And we're going to update on a few other cases, including going through the filing for the Lori Vallow case that her attorneys filed with the court, things like that. So we're going to kind of teeter-totter between verdict watch and keeping up with other stuff. In the meantime, hope you have a good rest of your day. We will see you soon.